From Ride the West Horse Expo in Spokane, Washington, Reinsman presents part 2 of our 13-week series with Sharon Camarillo. This week we join Sharon for the conclusion of her bidding clinic.
None of your horses get their mouths open when you bridle them and go to lope them out, do some stops and some backing up, do they? You never see your horses get their mouths open? Oh yeah, you're down here going, I don't want to admit that. You know, this is a drop nose band, and it's a wonderful piece of equipment just to remind your horses, whether they're young or old, they can't get their mouth open. Our bridles are designed to control our horses off of pressure points. If a horse has his mouth open and his tongue out, we're losing the contact with the horse's mouth and the bridle can't do its work. We need to stand on the fact that a horse understands pressure release. Pressure is a request for response. Release is a reward for the response. And it's up to that rider to start to understand the difference in the request, pressure, hold, response, release. About 3 fingers between the nose and the band itself still allows a horse to be supple in that jaw. Once they're supple in the jaw, they can be supple in the poll and vice versa. So I want to make sure that the equipment is not used to tie the horse's mouth shut. It's just there as a reminder when they open that jaw that there is some pressure placed. Again, reward and discipline. The discipline is he's opening his mouth. Pressure says you can't do that. He closes his mouth. Pressure is released. The horse is rewarded for the requested response. The uniqueness of my discipline is timed event, or training the timed event horse. An event, again, that's judged solely by the stopwatch. So we need efficiency. Efficiency is the key to be able to produce repetition and consistency. We're going to complement the use of our snaffle bits with some type of martingale, and this is going to be consistently applied. So do I use my horses with no martingale? Yes, but very rarely, and I know what I want. So I know when my horse is incorrect that I can immediately use my hands and legs to be able to rebalance my horse. We're going to be talking about balance in our later seminar, and that balance is going to come from your pelvis, your seat bones, your hands, and your legs. A balanced rider creates a balanced horse. But there are some keys that we can utilize in balancing our horses through equipment. Jules has a running martingale on. It's the most neutral of the 3 martingales that we're going to introduce. A well-adjusted running martingale is going to be long enough to provide direct control from the rider's hands to the horse's mouth without any type of pressure from the martingale itself. But in this case where it's very neutral, many times the rider says, I don't have enough control with this piece of equipment, so they start to tighten it up. And you'll remember early on, and you can see right here what we're getting, a dropped poll, horse heavy on the front end, and a jaw that's dropped to the chest. So we want to get that chin up, eyes forward, give the horse confidence that he can comfortably move in the direction that you're sending him. So when you feel like you're not getting the control from the running martingale, which again is the most neutral martingale that we can offer, it gives a wonderful resource to get a horse supple in his shoulder and stride. It's nice to put on an old horse that's already created a headset. 90% of the cases at our clinics, we suggest our riders use a German-type martingale. Reinsman makes a wonderful little device for us. You'll notice in our long training reins and also in our snaffle bit reins that there's a buttonhole about 20 inches back from the bit. And we're going to use this buttonhole to be able to precisely adjust a German martingale. Now the strength of the German martingale comes in getting our horses on the bridle and collected. And when we go back again to our slinky, we can't have these horses running and strung out thinking they're going to be balanced enough to rate and come in and make that really nice quick turn. And the strength of the German martingale does just that. So all this is a nice little piece of weighted harness leather. It's in a Y form. We're going to snap it to the cinch ring, and we're going to adjust it from the inside of our snaffle back to the buttonhole on the rein. And I think probably all of us have the traditional German martingales hanging in our tack room. The difficult adjustment on rings of a German martingale is the fact that you can't minutely adjust it. Usually there's a 5 or 6 inch distance between the rings. But all we can do here is be able to adjust it minutely, and then we're just going to take the slack and make a couple of rounds over our reins and just half hitch that off. The adjustment on our German martingale is critical because, like any piece of equipment, if it's adjusted incorrectly, we're going to cause an imbalance in our horse's carriage. And just by shortening this German martingale up, look what happens again. We drop the horse's poll, shift the weight heavy on the forehand, and her chin again is too close to her chest. So our equipment needs to be adjusted correctly, and that comes from the responsibility of the rider. Again, it's a group of methodical skills put together to control your horse. Never be afraid to make a mistake, because I think mistakes build your knowledge and gives you the opportunity to adjust and learn. So the German martingale is a wonderful piece of equipment on your barrel horse that you're training to collect an old-time barrel horse that's just kind of strung out. He's running through his turns. He's not staying collected or shortening his stride. The pole martingale, again, is a little different training aid. And this is about 11 feet of cording. And it's designed to be a martingale. It's going to strengthen our horse's ability to round in the back, flex in the loin, and produce a stop. From the inside to the outside, we want to have as little drag as possible. And from the outside to the inside, and we're going to tie it off in either a no-slip bowline knot or a little half hitch that we've produced on the martingale. We want to elevate the pole, and here's the key. Let's elevate the pole above the wither lift. Put her nose where her eyes can see out where she's going. And that's when this martingale should just come snug as you reach up and put it to the horse's neck. And what the martingale is exchanged for on your finished horse is a tie-down. The trend in barrel racing today is no tie-down. And you think, well, if I use a tie-down, it shortens my horse's stride. A tie-down doesn't slow a horse down, but what it does is it helps them balance. A resource for some of those horses that really like to run with their nose out, but they still need a balancing resource, is what we call a brow band tie-down. And we're seeing horses, like I said earlier, this little mare is off the track. That gives her the ability to know how to run without being taught. But it still doesn't mean that she's broke to any kind of control. Even though this mare now can run with her nose out, it's still going to provide a balance for her when I go to rate her. Balance front to back. I don't want them bouncing in on the front end. I want them to be able to shorten the stride. So balance is not falling forward and not sitting back, not dropping in and not drifting out. Balance position where they can lengthen the stride in between their barrels, shorten the stride for their rate, collect in a nice turn, and create efficient runs. We've talked about low school bridling, preschool to 6th grade. Our mid-school would be 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And at that point, we're starting to teach our students a little more developed philosophy as far as reading, ascertaining what we're understanding, being able to put information into a report form. And I'm going to call this 7th, 8th grade, this transition area in our children's development into high school, the transition area for our horses into a shank bit. As we're using shanks, then we're developing leverage. With leverage, we have more pounds per square inch to control our big, heavy horses. With the introduction of leverage onto my foundation equipment, which is created by a shank and more pressure point control with the addition of the curb strap, then I can equalize that balance with a 140-pound rider and an 1,100-pound horse. Not that riding comes from leverage, but a finished horse is in the bridle, in a shank, and understands the respect of pressure points. In our event of barrel racing, I see a real lack of the rider's incentive to go through the transition process to finish their horses out. And you know what? At a high rate of speed, I want some control. And I can't get it with an O-ring snaffle. I don't care how good my horses are. An O-ring snaffle is not going to give me the control to create and stimulate consistent, efficient runs. So the bridling transition is going to come through a process. And I didn't really watch Jules at all, but I know that she's had a bridle problem. Any of you have horses that have bridle problems? This little girl's been on the track, and you know, some of the people that are handling the horses on the track are just shoving those bits into the horse's mouths. Up goes their head because the horse knows, shove the bridle at me, I can take my nose and root you off, and I don't have to put the bridle in my mouth. Patience is the key. And what she's putting on Jules is what I have right here in my hand, and this is a pelham bit. What makes it a pelham is the fact that I can put 4 reins on this bit, one controlling the direct control that I've taught her in the snaffle to create suppleness laterally and longitudinally. And I can also then put a rein in the shank for introduction of curb pressure. I think it's important that you start the curb pressure with something that's a little less aggressive than a chain. The nylon or leather has still a good pressure point, but it stretches and it gives. And what you see on this particular bridle is the next step after the 4 reins. We've taken the 4 reins off and we've put a bit connector on, so there's a little direct control when I pull on the rein, and there's a little bit of introduction with leverage from the shank. This is about a 3-month process, and you may ride a week or so in your pelham, go back to the reinforcement in the foundation of one of your snaffles. And just because you're selecting a twisted O-ring doesn't mean that you wouldn't maybe have a 3-piece 6-bit. They're foundational equipment, but at different times your horses may need a little more leverage, a little more ability for you to seesaw left, right, let that bit run across that tongue, create a little sensitive pressure with the twist to lighten your horses up and to keep them nice and sensitive in the bridle where you can ride them out of your hands regardless of the speed that you're taking. Here's a simpler way to get your horse in that transition process. It's the next step from your O-ring snaffle. The little short shank on this particular bit, we call it a tender touch, provides a slip of the mouthpiece and a stop, an extension on the shank, which introduces your curb. It's a nice little bit that you can compete in and add speed on your horse as you start developing his skills. If your horse is between your hands and legs, he's not too aggressive running through your bridle, it's a decent competition bit. But I really like to use it in conjunction with our foundational snaffles as a transition, something to come back to, maybe trail ride, put a nice light little bit on your horse during the week when you're riding your horses or conditioning them. So the tender touch is a great little all-around bit. Okay, our horses are moving off our leg. They're balanced in between the leg pressure. You've got them up in the bridle. You can confidently and lightly maintain that contact between the horse's face through the reins back to the rider's hands. You've got good impulsion. The horse is moving up. So now it's time to start continuing the process of education, moving into the high school category, where in timed eventing you're prepared to go on to college, because when we let it all run out and we whip those barrel horses down that alleyway to get that good impulsion, that good send, to make those nice snappy turns, you really want to ride light and know you have the control to maintain shoulder elevation if necessary, the ability to shorten a horse's stride, hold him in the turn, to work again on efficient, consistent runs. So I'm going to now talk to you about choices that you would have in shank equipment that would now be competition equipment for the timed event horse. And regardless if it's barrel racing or pole bending, roping, it's a high rate of speed. You still need control. Control doesn't come from pulling. This is a short lifter. It's a really nice neutral bit. It's a ported bit, so therefore we have some tongue relief. Because we have the element of the shank, we have curb pressure. So we have tongue, bar, lip, curb, 4 areas of pressure with this design. The mobility of the mouthpiece makes it a very acceptable piece of equipment. It's a great little working cow horse bit, trail riding bit, very neutral, but in its own way, with the leverage of the shank and the curb, it's a nice balanced bit for a horse that has a good foundation. Swivel shank gives you the lateral suppleness and control that you're going to need. Pressure on the curb then gives you also that suppleness in the longitudinal line down the horse's spine. Lengthening and shortening of stride, suppleness in a turn, and the ability, because we're taking away the gag, you don't see a gag here, to elevate a drop shoulder to the left or right and help maintain a straightness on your horse. I have the wonderful opportunity to work with some great guys down at Rainsman Equestrian Products in Cleveland, Tennessee. Bob Brandon and Glenn Taylor combined have about 45 years of experience in the bit and tack business. They make the leather and they make the equipment. Bob's a great technician and mechanic. And he and I will work together. I'll call him and say, Bob, you know, I see these barrel horses too supple in the neck. I see the riders are pulling on the reins and getting them too round. They'll straighten the horses out a little bit. So we'll either add some gag or we'll take some gag away. There's other bits from other companies that you can choose. Rainsman is American made, good quality, consistent manufacturing. Have any of you ever missed your rate when you run into a barrel and you go a stride by? Nah. How about rating a little too early and clip a barrel on the backside? You know, I don't care that this is an event judged by the stopwatch. You still have to be efficient and you have to know you're in control. Some horses are just heavy in the bridle, and the more speed they get, the harder it is to get them slowed down and shortening their stride to prepare for the turn. This little chain bit is a wonderful resource to work on your control, to shorten your horse's stride. Now you'll notice that there's no gag in this piece of equipment. And overall, I prefer a choice in a bridle in my finished horse that doesn't have a lot of gag. The more gag, the more lateral control. The less gag, the more ability the rider will have to shorten the horse's stride. The proportion of this purchase, which is the mouthpiece to the headstall, is approximately 1 to 2 on the length of shank, which is from the mouthpiece to the rein. And I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb, 2 to 1. It creates a nice balanced bridle. You can have a 9-inch shank and no purchase and have an awfully cruel bit with a whole lot of leverage on your curb. So I like to maintain that 2 to 1 ratio. When we take away the gag, we also take away some of the lateral suppleness. So we're putting on a little more vertical control. If I have a horse running by the barrel, I'm not going to let that happen. It takes away the efficiency of the run. That good first barrel sets the pace for the rest of the performance. And I think it's important that when you run up that alleyway at a high rate of speed, you know you got control. So it's a combination of rating and turning. Control not only vertically, but also longitudinally or horizontally. So the little combination bit gives us the resource of nose pressure, curb pressure, to be able to shorten the horse's stride, rate him before the turn. There's a little bit of gag, so this is going to allow us to guide a horse nicely in the lateral position through the turn. The length of shank and the amount of purchase gives us a resource for elevation if we have a horse dropping his shoulder. So the combination bit really combines skills. The ability to shorten a horse's stride and make a nice supple turn. If he's dropping his shoulder, we can lift it up. Sometimes people will call us correction bit because it provides you the resource to correct a horse that's out of balance. But it's an awfully nice bit on a horse that needs some help. This comes in a longer shank. The shorter shank is really just a combination of our Tender Touch. An awfully nice bit. You can even use it as a transition bit. Shorter shank will give you that resource. A little bit of slip in the gag provides forgiveness before the bit takes a hold of a horse. And I think what you'll notice across the board is I have very little gag on my bridles. My suppleness comes from my foundation, and like I said earlier, my horses are forever in snaffles, but they're not always in snaffles. So during the week, we continue to work on the foundation, the suppleness, to provide us the control that we need in the weekend, on the weekend with our shank bridles. The round pin is a wonderful training aid and a great place to introduce new equipment, to introduce readjusted equipment without the rider on the horse's back. The round pin gives you a safe environment to be able to move your horses on the ground into the equipment and give them a little heads up for them to understand the pressure points and the control that the equipment that you've responsibly selected provides.
Reinsman is proud to bring you this 13-week series of Sharon Camarillo's Barrel Racing Clinic from Ride the West. Visit us at www.reinsman.com. For more information on Sharon's horsemanship and barrel racing clinics, visit her at www.sharoncamarillo.com. Next week, Sharon will discuss the developmental skills that lead to a balanced horse and rider. So please join us again next week right here on Horse TV. The Sharon Camarillo series is produced by Advent Communications. Contact us at clinictv@aol.com.